Hello and welcome to week 5 or English 102 business writing. This is the the penultimate week, as we like to say in fancy English terms, the second last week of this semester. This week's structure is going to be a little bit familiar to you because we did this for weeks 3 and 4. Week 3 will take you through the preliminary work of preparing to do your essay, and then, of course, week 6 final week, you'll be doing your essay as well as putting together presentations and some final reflection work. This week, we have a lot of things to introduce with the idea of argumentation. And so I'm going to jump straight into the readings, which obviously are going to be chapters 20, 21, and 24. In this chapter 20 is mostly about how you understand arguments when they're written or spoken. You'll find that most forms of writing in a formal context have some basis in argumentative essays. Not all of them are trying to persuade you of something. Not all of them are trying to convince you to agree with them, but they're all trying to make you believe that they are correct and that they should be believed. So you should understand what an argument is. I'm a big fan of looking at overall views of this sort of thing. And while Wikipedia is, again, not a valid source, it's a good place to look to understand some of these concepts of what an argument is, what the parts of an argument are, what's the different kinds of arguments, difference between deductive and inductive reasoning, and all that sort of thing. I find this very useful to get a wide angle view so that when I start doing my readings, I can get a better sense of what it is. To break it down, an argument is a logical, well thought out presentation of ideas, as the book says. And what does that mean? It means that you present an issue and a concept, something that you're trying to say or you're trying to convince people to think about. And then you make a strong claim. So this is a something that we have to pay attention to. This is something I believe. This is something I think is true. And then you support those claims with all sorts of reasons and evidence. Try to get people to believe them using different kinds of appeals. The book will focus a lot on emotional appeals and logical appeals. And then, of course, acknowledging that your argument is not necessarily correct. That's called bringing in the opposing viewpoints and discussing that. And then, of course, conclusion, which isn't just a restatement and a claim. It should also be, let's talk about this in an overall view and make one solid final argument. So things to pay attention to is what are your claims? Are they good claims? Are they things that can actually be argued? For example, if you say murder is wrong, that's probably a claim that's not going to lead to a lot of argument. You can have a different kind of claim, though, of discussions of circumstance, how things are defined, that sort of stuff. So it's always worth thinking about if your claim, the argument being made, is broad enough, or if it's, as they call, going for the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that's easy to argue because it's very unlikely anybody's going to disagree with you. So other things, of course, is how are you supporting it? How valid is the evidence you're bringing in? Different kinds of arguments in different contexts can require different types of support. In academic writing, especially, you're going to want a fairly solid, often scholarly style of support. So other kinds of writing require different kinds of claims and facts. Um, but you should always think about the validity of that. You notice that they'll mention the appeals. These are ways to help convince people that you are right or that this is a problem or that this evidence is worth listening to. Emotional appeals are the ones that get used the most because they're the ones who respond the most. And that includes appealing to what people need and appealing to people's values. Um, Notice that those appeals, we like to think of them as I want to appeal to everybody's sense of community or I want to appeal to people's sense of justice. But frankly, it has been well known that appeals often go to some of our darker emotions, for example, anger or fear. So while emotional appeals are extremely effective, they can distort arguments and distort claims if you're not careful about how you're doing them. And of course, there's another thing such as refutation, which is the rebuttal, which is other people have other points of view, and you want to acknowledge those. You want to try to address at least some of the most common rebuttals so that your argument stands up to it. So you can say, yes, I understand not everybody agrees with me, but here's why the disagreements are wrong or why they are missing the point or whatever. And so when you're looking at these example readings and seeing how it's broken down, pay close attention to how the arguments work and how effective you think the arguments are. Um, some arguments are constructed very well and aren't very effective, and some arguments that are most effective can be poorly constructed or well constructed. It's always worth knowing why it works on you the way it does. The truism of the world is everybody's trying to sell you something, so can you understand how they're trying to sell it to you? And of course, I would go through each of these examples to pay attention to how things work. Um, and once you have broken down how arguments are constructed, then the other thing is knowing how to construct them yourself. This is extremely important because, especially if you're going into a business field, you're going to need to convince people that your plans, your ideas need to be carried forward, and so that is something you will want to be able to back up with good, well-made arguments. So you want to have an issue that is defined enough that you can suggest something, a way to respond to it, a way to deal with it, a way to make it better, a way to learn to come to terms with it. You don't want to address an argument that, frankly, doesn't suggest any action. There are reasons to make those kinds of debates, but they are usually not very useful in terms of everyday action. So make a specific claim. It can call for an action or call for a response of some kind. And so make certain to do things. I'm going to point out one part of this book, though, especially right here. Effective arguments are logical. This is one of the few times that the book will lie to you. Um, Logical arguments should be the most effective. They are the most convincing in very many fields. Should be convincing in economics, should be convincing in science, should be convincing everywhere. But quite frankly, many people don't necessarily like logical arguments because they require a level of addressing and understanding the issue that a lot of people don't want to put in the work to do. So you need to understand how to use emotional appeals to draw people into the level of personal engagement it requires to follow through the logical steps of an argument. Emotional arguments are the ones that tend to be remembered and last longer. So understanding that means that you can make the logical arguments more effective. And so there's different kinds of reasoning. Inductive, we can understand information from looking at other points of information, and deductive, um, how you can come up with premises and conclusions, that sort of thing. And one thing to think about is these base have to address different kinds of audiences. You are never going to have all one kind of audience. Audiences that agree with your basic premise are good, are useful. Neutral wavering audiences and disagreeing audiences you may not be able to reach, especially if you're talking about something like a policy argument or religion or that sort of thing. So always be aware of that. No matter who you think you're addressing, you should be addressing multiple audiences and try to figure out how to have one audience you'll focus on and what you'll do when other audiences counter your arguments. And of course, this walks you through all sorts of steps in understanding in the construction of arguments. And of course, your pre-writing, guided writing will be at the end of this chapter after you put together your graphic organizer of some sort and go through the examples, which, by the way, I think are some fairly well-written examples, so please pay close attention to them. And then, of course, you have your guided writing assignment, which will be part of your pre-writing due this week, which is how you will create this. One thing I'll mention is I've noticed a lot of the pre-writing tends to just shortly address some of these answers, you don't want them to be paragraph long answers, but you may want to consider that the pre-writing is there to help you build your essay. So the more solid your pre-writing is, the more thought you put into these questions, the easier it is going to be to do your essay. So maybe do, instead, if you're doing just one sentence, do two sentences. If you're doing two sentences, see if you can do three, just to see if it can help you make your pre-writing and therefore your actual essays better. And of course, the last reading is about writing research papers, because you will be doing research and showing sources for the argument essay. So understand what the role of sources are in papers. And one thing you do, of course, is you want to not just have the information, but you need to have the information in context. Why did you choose it? What is the reader supposed to get from the information? How are they supposed to process it? That's all the reasons the sources are there, and that is much more important even than knowing that you didn't plagiarize something. All of that is also very important. So understand when you bring in information, it's not just there because you're told to have a certain number of sources, but how to because you're trying to actually provide support that will be convincing to people. By the way, I'm going to do a quick aside about how to do sources. Many people are not 100% comfortable with MLA citation style. I include myself in that. I always have to use other resources to help me make sure my citations are correct. I'm a big fan of sites such as easybib.com here, which will help you cite things. And easybib, depending on how accurate your source is, can take you through information. So this is one of the pages you will be looking at this week, and you can see it does pull up information. It will cite it if you click on the button, and then it will think for a couple moments and tell you what kind of information it has, and then it will build a citation for you. Now, it stops you on a page to tell you what information it's looking for or how you build it. That is where you use resources such as either the writer's reference, the back of the main book, or sites such as Purdue Online Writing Lab, so you understand the basics. What is a citation supposed to have in it? How is it built? Purdue Online Writing Lab not only has the overall guide, but it has specific how you do your works cited page, what it's supposed to look like, what pieces it need to be in there for any kind of citation. It can, electronic sources, periodicals, books, that sort of thing, as well as in-text citation basics. So once you go through here and you know you filled out what you need to make this an accurate citation, this has most of the steps you need, pieces you need already, then it'll build the citation for you. Do not trust the electronic tool to do it all for you. Once it gives you a citation, then you have to go through these other sources and verify that is correct. All right, so that's most of the readings. For the next video, I'm going to talk about the assignments ahead of you and what you're expected to do for them.